I just had someone in the comments ask me a question about lane filtering, specifically where you can sit, and it made me go back and have a look at the rules. Now, it turns out there's a change, and a fairly significant one at that. It actually does clarify a couple of things, but it will also have an impact potentially in the future on how we lane filter. So let's take a look at it. All right, so let's take a look at these rules now. I want to stress, first of all, that I am not a lawyer. This is in no way legal advice or anything like that. Do not take my word for any of this. I'm going to read out what the rules say and how they've changed, and then I'm going to give you my interpretation and my opinion on them. But that is just my opinion, right? So don't take it as gospel as what you should or shouldn't do. It's up to you to make your own choices. So let's take a look then. Okay, so just for reference, what we're referring to here is the New South Wales legislation, Road Rules 2014, specifically the road rules. This is not recommendations from RMS, etc., which there is usually conflicting information. So I'm just to be really clear, we're talking about the actual road rules. All right, now what I have found is that this actually changed during lockdown, during the pandemic. That actually has been in place for a couple of years. These rules changed in the 14th of August 2020, believe it or not. So I had no idea that these had changed. This is the thing, this is everything that's sort of wrong with the road rules and why everyone sort of has different versions of what they think is legal and what's not legal, is because they change and no one has any idea unless you study it. And even I study it and go and look at it and I know where to find it, and still I was 2 years out of date. So there you go. The big significant change is this used to be road rule 313-2. It is now 151A, right? So it's an entirely different section. The whole thing's changed quite significantly. So now, what it used to state was that there was a road rule which was an exception to lanes, and it basically covered off the lane filtering. It had a few definitions. Rule 146 does not apply to the right of lane filtering, which is basically saying when you're lane filtering, you don't have to follow the lanes. The rider is a holder of an unrestricted license, not more than 30 k's an hour, a road school zone, and when it is safe to do so, right? That was the previous definitions. Right, so previously we just had those real 5 definitions that we had to follow. Now we've got 6 entirely separate sub-rules. Right, okay, so let's run through them. Now, first of all, whenever you're looking at this particular part of the road rules, you also got to remember that it is referenced in other parts. So the other 2 parts, there's 2 sections where it's referenced. Part 5, change of direction and using your signals. Essentially, there's a section there that says change of direction, section 44, division 1. Division does not apply when entering or leaving a roundabout, and lane filtering does not apply. So essentially, you don't have to indicate when you're lane filtering. And the other one is keeping left overtaking and road rules, section part 11, division 3, overtaking, section 141, overtaking, etc. on the left-hand side of the vehicle. A driver must not overtake a vehicle to the left of the vehicle unless the driver is lane filtering in accordance with rule 151A. That's the new rule. So it's just those couple of sections just allow lane filtering to happen because you're not following a lane. Let's jump into it. Okay, so here we go. So this is within part 11, which is about keeping left overtaking and other driving rules. Division 4, which is about driving within a marked lane, which is the reference we just talked about. And this is essentially 151A is then an exception to that, which is the definition of lane filtering between vehicles on a motorbike. That is what 151A is. Then has 6 sub-rules. First sub-rule is the rider of a motorbike is lane filtering along a length of road if the rider rides a motorbike between 2 cars. Each vehicle is traveling in A, the same direction as the motorbike, and B, separate but adjacent to marked lanes or lines of traffic. That's a slight change. Previously, we had... Oh, here we go. It was the rider of a motorbike is lane filtering if the motorbike is ridden between other vehicles that are being driven in 2 adjacent marked lanes in the same direction, right? So had to be in 2 lanes specifically. Both lanes had to be going in the same direction to be able to filter. So that has changed in that we have to just apply to those 2 things, which is 1, it has to be going in the same direction, and B, separate but adjacent marked lanes or lines of traffic, right? Lines of traffic means that it may not be marked lanes, right? So if you have 2 lines of traffic on an unmarked road, you can still filter between them, whereas the previous rules you couldn't. All right, so it actually does open up, allow us to filter as long as you're going between traffic that is heading in the same direction, and the lines, marked lanes, all lines of traffic, and separate but adjacent to. So they just have to be next to each other. That's all. Okay. That was subsection 1. Subsection 2, subrule 2, the rider of a motorbike must not unlawfully lane filter along the length of the road. Now, that is massively broad and open, of course, but subrule 3 does clarify what that actually means. So subrule 1 is just what you'll get penalised on, because that actually says a max 20 penalty units. Penalty units are not relative to license points, just by the way. But essentially, that's saying that's what you'll get charged for if you don't do the following, which is subrule 3, which says for subrule 2, it is unlawful for the rider of a motorbike to lane filter along a length of road if any of the following circumstances apply. A, the rider is edge filtering. Okay, that's new. B, the rider is riding at a speed of more than 30 kilometers an hour. That's not new. The rider is riding in school zone. Not new. A no filtering sign applies to the length of road. That is new. E, it is not safe to lane filter. Slightly different wording to what it was previously, but the same thing. It used to say when it is safe to do so. It now says you must not filter when it is not safe to lane filter. Slightly different wording, kind of means the same thing. E1, the rider is not the holder of an unrestricted motorbike rider's license, right? That still holds, same deal. So the big change there is edge filtering. There is a definition now for edge filtering, and there is a sign for no filtering. Right, so clearly there are parts of the roads that are going to be marked as no filtering zones. So that's something to look forward to. I'll go into that in more detail. It does go into it. There's 2 subrules there's 3 subrules that follow this. Yeah, 2 of them apply to the sign, 1 applies to edge filtering. So those 2 things we'll go into in 1 second. Now, it does give an example of when it is safe to do so, when it is not safe to do so, as the wording is now. The example is a rider lane filtering between vehicles in a manner that does not seek to avoid collisions, including lane filtering between vehicles when there's insufficient clearance between those vehicles. So same as it did before, it doesn't specifically say things like buses and trucks. People get confused and they say you're not allowed to filter past buses and trucks. That is incorrect. That is a recommendation from RMS, but it is not a rule. The rule says it has to be safe. Thing is, quite often between buses and trucks, it is not safe. But the rule is not specific to buses and trucks. It's a judgment call on whether it's safe. But here they quite clearly say insufficient clearance, which, one could argue if the gap is smaller than your handlebars. So even though if you do that little trick that I do all the time, you could argue that that's not safe. It's perfectly safe because you have full control. You could argue they have full control of the motorcycle at all times, and so therefore it is safe. That would be an interesting conversation. Now, subrule number 4, no filtering sign on a road applies to a length of road starting at the sign and ending at the nearer to the following of A, the length of road ends at a T intersection or a dead end, i.e. it's the end of the road, or B, the next end no filtering sign that is on the road. So if you see a sign that says no filtering, then there'll be another sign that says end no filtering, and away you go. Subsection 6, I'll just skip 5 and go straight to 6 for a second because it refers to the same thing. End no filtering sign means in traffic a symbol displaying a motorbike position between 2 vehicles with a black diagonal line across the symbol, or with symbol positioned below the symbol mentioned in paragraph A with the words end in black letters, meaning that's what the start and the end looks like. And then there's another additional one that just says it might be red. So that's just the definition. Subrule 6 is just purely saying this is what the sign looks like. I'll have a look through. There is normally a definition of all the signs, so I'm curious to see if there is one. Okay, so last but not least, subrule number 5, going back. For this rule, the ride of a motorbike is edge filtering along the length of the road if A, the rider changes direction towards the edge of the road to pass one or more vehicles on the road, or B, the rider changes direction towards the edge of the road to pass between two vehicles, one of which is stationary. That is oddly specific, while also being massively broad at the same time. That one is probably the one that requires the most thinking. I think my assumption here is what they're trying to prevent is people filtering down. Say you have 3 lanes of traffic and you're filtering between lanes 2 and 3, and you get blocked because someone hasn't left enough of a gap. And so then you change between 2 cars that are like this. You go in between them to get to effectively between lanes 1 and 2, right, to continue filtering. I think that is what they're specifically trying to stop, because I know that I have almost been taken out by riders who suddenly pop out between 2 cars. Does happen a fair bit. So that's interesting. However, it's very broad, very, very broad. A rider changes direction towards the edge of the road. Now, what has changed between those? So the 2 massive things that have changed, there is a sign saying no filtering, and the edge filtering reference. Now, going back to the old rules, Subrule 4 said, however, the rider of a motorbike is not lane filtering if the rider rides past a parked vehicle. Now, there is no more references to parked vehicles. That is interesting. That kind of implies to me that you can now filter past parked cars. So if you have cars parked on the left against the gutter, you can filter between those cars and the cars that are in traffic, less than 30 kilometers an hour, to your right, which is quite interesting. Now, I would assume they're trying to cover that definition in this Subrule 5. The rider changes direction towards the edge of the road, but that's doesn't say if you approach the traffic and it's stopped, and you've got parked cars on the left and you've got stationary cars on the right, then you can now filter between them. Is my interpretation of this, because it no longer has this rule that says anything about parked cars. So that is very interesting. Most of those sort of smaller definitions are still pretty much the same, as in 30 kilometers an hour, school zones, etc., safe to do so, etc. That's all, and full license. That's all remains the same. The big change is the edge filtering definition, and then the filtering signs. Filtering signs is, I'll touch on that one first because I have an opinion on it, a fairly strong one. Clearly, there are areas, and I'm sure all of us can think of particular areas where it is more difficult to filter. In those areas, I'm sure more reckless riders have probably taken off a whole bunch of mirrors, and eventually people have gone, you know what, that's not cool. To stop that happening, we're going to say in this section of road you can no longer filter. Now, one of those areas that I can think of off the top of my head that I've seen other riders struggle with is Epping Road. Coming up from Epping Boys up towards Epping itself. Now, if that was to be declared a no filtering zone, I would be extremely disappointed, because it would mean that that's where I gain probably the biggest advantage in filtering. You know, if I can't filter through there, then why am I even riding a motorbike? Yeah, it would just completely demolish the advantage you get from riding, you know, towards the city. So The whole point of filtering is to keep us safe, but it was also an encouragement to get people on motorcycles to use less emissions and save space in the city, congestion, all that sort of stuff. But this effectively ruins it. If that's the case, like I'm making a whole bunch of assumptions there, but if they do put it there, so I'd be terribly pissed if that was declared a no filtering zone. I haven't seen any signs as yet. As I said, that was declared, that rule was actually put in place 2 years ago, almost to the day. So, and I haven't seen any signs put in place since. So who knows? May never happen. The other one is the edge filtering. That's the one that I find I'd be interested to see what you think of that. But to me, it is just, I don't know what, like it's got a definition called edge filtering, but then it says changing, if a rider changes direction towards the edge of the road, changes direction, right? That's weird. So if I'm in lanes, in between lanes 1 and 2, and that gets blocked, and I go towards between lanes 2 and 3, can I do that? Because it's not towards the edge of the road, it's towards the middle of the road. So that's totally fine, but I can't go the other way? That doesn't make sense. And then when it says the rider changes direction towards the edge of the road between 2 vehicles, one of which is stationary. Why one? If the rider changes direction towards the edge of the road to pass between 2 vehicles, I'm just trying to think of the circumstances where that happens, one of which is stationary. When does that happen? I don't know. I can't actually imagine that scenario. So I don't know what that rule is trying to stop. The only thing I can think of is it's trying to stop people going between lanes while they're filtering. That's the, I get why you would have a rule like that. Does it really need it? I don't think so. So anyway, love to know your thoughts on what you think has changed. Personally, I feel this is the same as every other rule that ever existed in the history of the human race. It's only there because, the 1% to 2% of people who can't judge, right and wrong have to have these rules in place. If everyone just chilled out and did the right thing, we wouldn't need any rules. So, yeah. I'm going to do a little video. We went riding in Thailand and Bali where there's seemingly no rules, and it's so much easier. It's so much less stressful. It actually feels safer, and there's basically no rules. So it's an interesting argument. The more we add rules, the more we add process, the more we have, I don't know. Does the road rules create the aggression because of it's got something for people to argue over? Whereas if you took away the thing to argue over, would people have to just accept other people's judgments? Interesting debate. Key things that changed is the edge filtering rules, the sign rules, and the removal of the parked vehicle fronts. That's what I see as significant changes. Anyway, love to know your thoughts. What's your interpretation of this? I'll link to the legislation in the description so you can have a look at it, and I'd love to know your thoughts. Thanks. All right, stay safe, have fun, and I will see you next time.